They developed the concept of design thinking, which can be applied to social, personal, and professional situations. They also created and taught a Design Your Life course at Stanford University. So what we want to look at today is how designers create worlds and solve problems using design thinking. So look around your office or your home. Look at the tablet or smartphone that you may be holding on the chair you're sitting in. I mean, even the computer that you're using right now. Everything in our lives was designed by someone. And every design starts with a problem that designers or a team seeks to solve. So some of the things we want to accomplish today are learning objectives, and there's quite a few of them. Identify the elements of any design and the four-step process for approaching design making with conscious competency. We also want to show why moving beyond a binary decision can increase decision satisfaction, which will involve considering a strategy for gathering and generating more options. We're going to learn about research for why narrowing down options to 3 to 6 facilitators, narrowing down options 3 to 6 facilitates action on design making, and why too many options can stall or paralyze action. We're going to practice a cognitive tool for narrowing down options called the decision matrix, which is actually a really great tool. And why the gut feeling is a physical manifestation of actually knowing, not just a metaphor, why emotions are an integral part of decision making. And they shouldn't be something that's kept out of the process. We're going to share a framework for how to make a choice when options seem on par or when everything seems equal. We're going to discuss research on the value of letting go after a decision is made, which is sometimes hard to do. And we're going to present a framework for evaluating the quality of the decision made. So first, let's do a little warm-up exercise to get those decision-making muscles going. Open up the chat box if you have it so you can see it relatively easily. And I'm going to fire out some quick questions, and I just want you to, in the chat box as quickly as possible, write one or the other. Okay? We ready? All right. Coffee or tea? Okay. We got one of each. Okay. Ready? City life or country life? We got more coffees coming in. All right. Country, city, country. Okay, looks like country's winning. Text or calling?
So, class is full. Like, that's the full I have 10.
But talk.
One.
Some just like cats.
Wow. Yeah. So
I like cats too.
But they're either.
Okay, winter or summer? Come on, if we're in Hawaii, I'm thinking probably maybe winter. It's nice in the winter here.
Of course.
Winter,
Of
yeah.
course.
Oh,
I was
summer.
thinking like maybe I would bring them by here.
Beach vacation or mountain vacation?
What they have available. So I see now that there's a doorbell.
Beach or mountain?
So
Beach, definitely beach. The beaches are winning. Okay. Would you prefer to read a book or watch a movie?
Right.
Me too. Me too. Everybody's putting book. Me too. Okay, we got a bunch of readers. That's awesome. Early bird or night owl? You guys stay up late or get up early? What do you do? Totally, me too. Night owl, across the board. All right, we've got a bunch of like-minded people here. Excellent.
So on this side.
I want to thank you guys for participating.
Yeah. Or they go down.
So, you are here. Now, this sign is both literal, like a bubble on a Google map, and it's also figurative, as in this philosophical statement. You are here is one of the underlying philosophies of design thinking, especially as it applies to life design. It's the concept is that you start from where you are. So the past is gone, the future's unknown. And so the place to begin is simply to be where you are right now. By embracing this philosophy, it's possible to let go of self-judgment, stop the procrastinating, and just get started. So let's look a little bit more at this design process. Design thinking is a structured process typically used by designers to develop products. But since we're going to be designing our own lives, the accepting stage has been added to the process. So first, we must accept where and who we are, and then we start from there. And the 5 stages of design thinking process, the traditional 5 steps, are to empathize. First, to understand your user's needs. So in terms of life design, that would be to understand your needs. Okay. Then we want to define or identify your needs and problems. Ideate, which is to develop potential solutions, multiple ideas. Then we're going to transform your idea into a tangible solution, okay, a way for you to prototype it, see if it works. And then we're going to test those solutions. Okay. So to do this, what designers do is they think differently, and they use 5 processes, I guess you would call it, to help in their design thinking process. One is called radical collaboration. Now, design is typically a collaborative process, and what you'll find is many times the best ideas are going to come from other people. And what's radical about this kind of process is that you want a really diverse team, different experiences, different perspectives, different points of view, even different beliefs. Another tool they use is called reframing. Reframing is how designers get unstuck. Reframing enables designers to examine ways to look at problems differently. It's a way to gain new perspectives in order to increase the opportunities for innovation. And they heavily use curiosity. Curiosity makes everything new. It invites exploration. Curiosity is an open approach to learning more. Designers look through the lens of curiosity rather than judgment or rushing to find a solution. You'll often hear designers say, "Tell me more," but they'll ask open questions to get at the needs and wants, to find out what works, what doesn't work, and what's missing. So use curiosity to keep that open. We need to be mindful of the process. Sounds a little funny, but being aware of the where you are in the design thinking process is important because it informs your approach. It's also important to be aware of your own processes, right? Are you rushing to a solution, or are you staying open? Are you blocked, or are you energized? Are certain activities draining and other ones are helpful? Being mindful of the process is key to the journey of product and, more importantly, life design. Okay, and designers have a bias towards action. This means they want to build their way forward. And this is at the heart of design thinking, because really what we want to do is commit to building our way forward. Designers try things. They test out ideas. They're not concerned with failing, but rather they keep trying things until they find what works and what solves the problem. Designers embrace change. They're not attached to one particular outcome. Yet they're open. They stay curious. And lastly, storytelling. We have that. Storytelling is part of all of these mindsets and processes. It's important to reflect, to debrief, and to share how you felt and what you discovered during this process. All right, over to you, Kim.
Hey, like Cookie Monster here, we all have to make decisions. And I'm going to spend some time talking about the process of making decisions and how to get better at it. Okay, we're going to share a decision-making process to help you make great decisions that you feel happy with. But before we do that, let's ground ourselves in a real decision. Please take a minute to reflect on the following questions. I would like you to jot down a real decision that you need to make. An important choice, maybe one where you feel stuck or indecisive. Next, jot down what emotion comes up when you think about making this decision, such as happiness, anger, fear, excitement, frustration, etc. I'm going to give you a quick minute here to think about what decision you want to make and what emotion is connected to that. Let's give you a minute. Just jot down what decision you want to make and then an emotion. Okay, so hold on to your decision that you just jotted down because we're going to come back to it a little bit later in this presentation. Okay, elements of a decision. So when it comes to decisions, every decision has 3 elements. The first one is options. These are the things that you're choosing between. The next is objectives. This is the goal or criteria you have for the decisions and what you want out of that decision. And lastly is information, what you know about your options and objectives and how those elements line up, or maybe there's things that you still need to find out. So these are the elements of a decision. But what do you do with these elements? It's helpful to have a process to work with here. So let's talk about the decision-making process. Here's how we think about decision-making. There's typically 4 steps. First, we gather and create lots of options. If we're good at generating lots of options, then we'll need to narrow those down. Eventually, we choose. And finally, many of us have a tendency to agonize over the decision we made. Sometimes we agonize over these decisions for weeks or even months. But we will encourage you not to agonize, but rather see if you might be able to reframe it. The decision is really made not after choosing, but after accepting the decision and letting go of all other options. What we want is to let go and move on. And we'll share some research for why this is such a helpful strategy. But first, let's take a closer look at these in order. The first step is to gather and create options, which for many of us, this can be easy to do. This is a piece of the process that really helps with letting go and moving on. For me, it's much easier to let go and move on when I know that no matter what happens with the choice that I make, I can always gather and create new and valuable options in the future. However, even though there are all these options, many of us find ourselves choosing between 2 things. Should I do this or not do this? Or should I do this or should I do that? I want to flag this sort of thought process as an opportunity to think beyond the binary, because research suggests that expanding our options beyond 2 is a helpful and making a good decision, and decisions we're likely to be happy with. We have a short video highlighting some work done by Chip and Dan Keith, who wrote a book on decision-making called Decisive.
You and I will have to make many hard decisions over our lifetime. Like, what career should I pursue? What school should I go to? And which job offer should I take? But here's a troubling fact. When faced with hard decisions like these, we will make a decision we regret more often than we think. When people make the decision to go to law school, pass the bar, and become a lawyer, there's a 44% chance that they will not recommend a young person to become a lawyer, according to the American Bar Association. When a Philadelphia school system examined the retention rate of their teachers, they found that the teachers were twice as likely to drop out of the school system than the students were. To avoid making a decision that we'll later regret, like these lawyers and teachers, we need to identify common decision pitfalls and avoid them. In the book Decisive, authors Chip and Dan Heath identify these 3 dangerous decision pitfalls. Pitfall number 1, we rarely consider more than 2 options when making a decision. In 1993, Ohio State University researcher Paul Nutt examined 168 decisions of big organizations. He found that 69% of their decisions only had 1 alternative. These 2-option decisions led to unfavorable results more than half the time. But when the executives considered more than 2 options, they had a favorable result more than 2/3 of the time.
Okay, so just by adding a 3rd option and moving away from the binary, suddenly the quality of the outcome goes up. Always try to have at least 3 or more options when trying to make a decision. Another reason for gathering and creating options is about the idea of luck. Now, to unpack the word luck, which can have a lot of baggage associated with it, I want to bring back to a study done by Richard Wiseman. What Wiseman did was have people rate themselves on how lucky they were, from very, not at all, and somewhere in the middle. Then they performed a task, count the number of photographs in the newspaper. Now, they didn't know that this was a fake paper, and then on page 2, he placed a giant page note that said, "Stop counting. There are 43 photographs in this paper." He says later for fun, he placed a second note halfway through that says, "Stop counting. Tell the experimenter that you have seen this and win $250. Now, what he found was that those who rated themselves as lucky found the note, stopped, collected the prize. And those who rated themselves as unlucky stayed focused on the task and just kept counting. So why is this significant? Wiseman found that anxiety disrupts people's ability to notice the unexpected. It's helpful to develop a peripheral vision. When you pull back and allow yourself to maintain a viewpoint bigger than your original goal, You begin to see options that you might not have planned for, you might not have seen. The lucky participants often made a conscious effort to expand their vision. So in fact, this was not about passively waiting for things to happen to you, but instead, this is about creating your own luck. So the takeaway, the next time you find yourself choosing between two things, see if you can expand your set of options to 3 or more. You'll gain perspective, you'll see more possibilities, and you'll likely decrease the anxiety about the notion of the right choice, and instead make a perfectly good decision in the end. Okay, so now that we've added more possibilities to your decision, it's time to start narrowing down your options to a more manageable number. So first, you increase your possibilities to make sure that you're not missing anything or leaving any option out. And then for all these options, you start to narrow down your decision. And I'm not sure about you, but sometimes I can get overwhelmed and I have too many options to choose from and experience something that's called choice overload. Now, there's evidence that suggests that having too many options can actually be worse. So let's look at research from a JAM study conducted by Dr. Sheena Iyengar and what she has to say about choice overload.
So when I was a graduate student at Stanford University, I used to go to this very, very upscale grocery store. At least at that time, it was truly upscale. It was a store called Draeger's. Now this store, it was almost like going to an amusement park. They had 250 different kinds of mustards and vinegars and over 500 different kinds of fruits and vegetables and more than 24 different kinds of bottled water. And this is during a time when we actually used to drink tap water. I used to love going to this store, but on one occasion, I asked myself, well, how come you never buy anything? Oh, here's their olive oil aisle. They had over 75 different kinds of olive oils, including those that were in a locked case that came from 1,000-year-old olive trees. So I one day decided to pay a visit to the manager, and I asked the manager, is this model of offering people all this choice really working? And he pointed to the busloads of tourists that would show up every day, with cameras ready usually. We decided to do a little experiment. And we picked jam for our experiment. Here's their jam aisle. They had 348 different kinds of jam. We set up a little tasting booth right near the entrance of the store. We either put out 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to, stop, sample some jam? More people stopped when there were 24, about 60%, than when there were 6, about 40%. The next thing we looked at is in which case were people more likely to buy a jar of jam? And now we see the opposite effect. Of the people who stopped when there were 24, only 3% of them actually bought a jar of jam. Of the people who stopped when there were 6, well, now we saw that 30% of them actually bought a jar of jam. Now, if you do the math, people were at least 6 times more likely to buy a jar of jam if they encountered 6 than if they encountered 24. Now, choosing not to buy a jar of jam is actually probably good for us, at least it's good for our waistlines. But it turns out that this choice overload problem affects us even in very consequential decisions. We choose not to choose even when it goes against our best self-interests.
Okay, so Dr. Iyengar says something really interesting. We choose not to choose even when it goes against our best interests. At some point, narrowing down is so important because it makes the decision more manageable and keeps us from getting stuck. So how do we narrow down? Next, Tomoko's going to walk you through how to do exactly that.
Hey. So now, when we need to simplify a decision, many of us turn to a pros and cons list. And who here have ever made a pros and cons list when trying to make a decision? And you figure out what's good, what's not, and hopefully you're able to choose the one with the most pros and the fewest cons. And that is one perfectly serviceable tool. Yes. And what we want to introduce here is another powerful tool for narrowing down options, a decision matrix. So this is a way to use the visual thinking skills. This allows you to tap into the parts of your brain that go beyond just language or words and find new information about yourself. So this tool also allows for pattern recognition, which is important for designers to get even more accurate information about how small the differences between seemingly agonizing choices may actually be. Okay, so a decision matrix makes use of the components of a decision that we considered before, the options, objectives, and information, and help us simplify a decision by viewing them systematically. So on the top, you'll have your options, the choices that you're deciding between. And on the side, you'll have your objectives along the side. These are criteria you'll use. These are the things you're trying to get at or learn and the factors you're using to make the decision. And the information we have about each corresponding space within the grid. And example is going to help this come to bring to life. Okay, so now let's take a look at career-related example. And some objectives that I might have in a job include minimum additional skill building, or interesting and rewarding, pays the bills, ideal location, and schedule. And for our example, let's consider some fictional career paths. The Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, the Boogie Monster, and the Cupid. So the Tooth Fairy visits children and leaves them money in exchange for baby teeth that have fallen out. Santa Claus brings gifts to children worldwide on Christmas. The Boogie Monster is a term applied to things that scare children at night when alone, often portrayed as living beneath their bed. And Cupid makes people fall in love with his arrows. Now it's important to not imagine that we can calculate a correct decision. And one way to keep that in mind is to use shaded circles or smiley faces as the way to indicate how well each option meets each objective. So let's walk through an example. Okay, so let's consider Santa Claus. In this case, I think that it will be really rewarding work. Santa gets to give gifts to all children all over the world, so I give it a fully shaded circle. But the location on the North Pole really isn't for me. I don't like cold places. And in the case of the Tooth Fairy, maybe I've done some research online and I know that this job really has good salary. But as I'm researching, I realized that the Boogie Monster schedule is really bad. I would have to wake up in the middle of the night every night to scare the kids. But the Cupid schedule, on the other hand, is great. I would only need to work 1 day per year, which is Valentine's Day. Okay, so we can see that we can follow this process for each option and the objective. And before we get into examining what we learned here, a quick word. If you're doing a matrix and you realize you don't know how to fill out a particular square in your grid, it actually means that you're just missing some information. So those blank spots can turn into prototypes. And for example, maybe I'm still left wondering how the Tooth Fairy work pays the bill. And that is something I can find out by a prototype doing informational interviews with a Tooth Fairy. And what if I don't have time right now to find out because a decision deadline is looming? Well, this process can help me plan short-term and long-term. Perhaps I'll end up being the Boogie Monster who lives under the bed at night. And while in that job, I meet the Tooth Fairy who comes to visit and I can set up that informational interview then. How might this decision help give you insight into objectives that cannot be met now? Okay, so now that we have all of this information, we can begin to simplify the decision. The first thing I noticed is that each of these roles requires a similar amount of additional training. So I know that this won't be the factor that makes the difference between any of them. The next thing I can do is to compare two options against each other. So as I look at the Boogie Monster versus the Tooth Fairy, I see that the Tooth Fairy is at least as good, if not better than the Boogie Monster on each of my objectives. So I can remove the Boogie Monster from my set of options. Next, let's compare Cupid versus Santa Claus. In this case, I see that Cupid is at least as good, if not better than Santa Claus on each of my objectives. Now we're left with much simpler decision. As I compare these two, I again see that there's one factor on each which they are equivalent. The question then is, which of these is the best option? I'm leaning towards Cupid, even though the pay is less than the Tooth Fairy. For me, I think Cupid is more rewarding. And which one do you think is a better option? You can type in the chat box, Cupid or the Tooth Fairy. Which one would you choose? Tooth Fairy? Okay. Okay, yes, pay matters, yes. Tooth Fairy or Cupid? Cupid, I see some Cupid. Thank you for that. Yeah, so in case like this, there simply isn't a best option. Either option really could be great. So how do we decide? Okay, I see some Cupids again. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, now it's your turn. A decision matrix makes use of the components of decision that we considered before, the options, objectives, and information, and help us simplify decision by viewing them systematically. And we can list our options along the top of a grid, our objectives along the side, and the information we have about each corresponding space within the grid. Okay, but before we work on this activity, I want you to beware the not. So beware the not in decision matrices. Not an option is actually not an option. It is just the absence of a choice. So focus instead on what you might do instead of use these as options in your matrix. So for example, accept the offer or negotiate to change the term. Accept the offer or conduct more info interviews. The options you generate come out of your objectives, the thing you are trying to do or attain. Okay, so get your piece of paper out, your pen or pencil, and write this decision matrix. Okay, on the top right, your options, and aim for at least 3 options. And then on the left side, you'll have your criteria. And then use shaded circles or smiley faces as the way to indicate how well each option meets each objective. So remember the decision you wanted to make when we started off our workshop. So think about that decision and bring out 3 options and the criteria, the objective. I will give you 8 minutes and I will start my timer now. Okay, one more minute. Okay, time is up. How was it? How was it using the decision matrix as a tool to narrow down options? And I want to ask you for a volunteer to share any surfacing potential benefits as well as areas where you may have gotten stuck. Or what other tools, resources have you found helpful in narrowing down options? Does anyone want to share? Please unmute your mic, or you can type in the chat box.
Okay, let's introduce how we know things, right? And a lot of this, what we did, we kind of just know it. And we want to learn, we want to know, we also want to use knowing to help us make decisions. Okay, we call this discernment, which is using our embodied ways of knowing. there are different ways of knowing that we can use to identify and narrow down the elements of a decision, or even to make the decision itself. To dig into this and to the question of how we know what we know, we're going to do a quick and fun exercise, okay? I'm going to put a statement up on the screen, and I want you to please type into the chat box whether true or false as quickly as possible, okay? And we're going to find out maybe, if these true or falses. I want to ask you guys as we're doing this, where this comes from. All right, so pay attention to where you're getting these quick decisions from. All right, here we go. Ready? Is it healthy to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep? True or false? True, 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 true. Can I ask somebody why? Why do you guys think it's true? Somebody type in why. Where did you come up with that idea? Where did you guys come up with that? Anybody? Where did you get that impression? You just feel better when you wake up? Experience, okay. So that's kinesthetic. You feel it. You've experienced it. You've done it, right? Anybody else? Where do you come up with this idea? No? You feel more awake. Okay, it's kinesthetic. So most people agree with this because they feel it. Okay, let's try another one. Ready? Does a pound of feathers weigh more than a pound of bricks? True or false? No. Same. Why? Why is this false? Why is this false, guys? Why do you say it? Why is it the same? What gives you that idea? Because a pound is a pound no matter what. Feathers fall slowly. This is true. This is true. So that's cognitive, right? You thought about it, right? A pound is a pound, right? It's the definition of a pound. I don't see anybody mentioning like all the pain that those ducks and geese went through to get those feathers, right? So nobody had a real emotional attachment to this one. Just cognitive. Okay, we're going to do another one. Ready? Everything happens for a reason. True or false? Ooh, a lot of believers. Okay. Wow. All right. Now this one I'm really interested in. Why do you believe that's true? Somebody tell me, why is that true? Somebody. It's your beliefs. Okay. Spiritual, intuition. Everyone has reasons. Personal experience where things worked out later. Okay, so we do have a kinesthetic one as well. Somebody's actually experienced this and they believe it. Okay. And some people are more spiritually connected to it, or maybe just intuition. Like you just know it, right? You feel good about it. Okay, last one. Ready? Is it wrong to kill ants? Is it wrong to kill ants? Come on. True or false? Let's go, people. It is. I agree, Sophia. I agree. Now when they're in my kitchen, my wife would agree with you as well. See, I go back and forth on these things. I got to tell you. Fire ants. I'm glad somebody brought that up. So there's an emotional decision there and also kinesthetic, right? If you've been bitten by a fire ant, you pretty much have lost all sympathy for ants. Why are you guys saying yes, no, or whatever? Give me some ideas here. The fire ant, I get. It's an emotional decision. No spiritual connection to ants. Thank you, Sophia. Ants are amazing creatures. I relate to them quite a bit. They have amazing strength, like me, but they're so small. Their strength is kind of inconsequential. There it is. So you guys use discernment, okay, in making those true false decisions. And we define discernment as a decision making that integrates multiple ways of knowing: cognitive, affective, physical, and even social, as opposed to just deciding. But another aspect is, how do you know when you know? When you make a decision, do you trust yourself? For instance, if I'm going to go with my gut, how do I listen to my gut? What words do my gut speak? And how do I add that to the facts? But if you understand your own ways of knowing, like you know what your gut is telling you, and you have practices or a process that help you to gather those experiences and give you that information, then you can combine them. And then the argument is that your discernment will be more effective, that you will make better, more authentic decisions for yourself by being able to employ those different elements. So don't discount these ways of knowing, okay? It may take some time both to implement and to master this, but using multiple ways of knowing, listening to yourself. It's important in the decision-making process. Let's think a little bit more about what does this listening to yourself means and elaborate on the multiple ways of knowing to notice or recognize or distinguish between the various ways that we can be discerning. Okay, discernment integrates cognitive ways of making decisions, as we saw in some of your true false. Okay, it's like some people make pros and cons lists using logic, right, or the decision-making matrix. Although on those quick decisions, I think a lot of you use logic. Okay, we can use emotional intelligence, like me and Sophia, with our connection to ants, our feelings, our intuition, our sense of spirituality. We can also pay attention to our bodies, right? How we physically react to different possibilities, like listening to your gut. Like some people say, they trust their gut. And we can use our social intelligence to draw on the wisdom of mentors, family, and community. All of these ways of knowing are important when making different types of decisions. So again, how do you know when you know? And are there different ways of knowing? We can describe the experience of knowing in a variety of different ways. I can have the experience of knowing when I recognize something, right, as opposed to thinking about it. And it's interesting that the wife of one of the authors, David Evans, he said that his wife said, I didn't fall in love with him. I just recognized it. Kind of sweet, huh? Okay, then there's the internal effect of knowing. Okay, and here I have an example. One time I was engaged with a team meeting, and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be part of the project. Like I didn't know if I had enough time. But on the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I knew that I actually did care about the project and I wanted to participate. But due to my emotions of attachment to my biases, I'd already kind of like said, no, I don't have time and this kind of thing. And let's face it, procrastination, I tend to do that. It took another 3 weeks for my brain to come up with a detailed, rational justification for myself, right? That would allow me to finally make the decision. And in truth, I'd already made on the way home. So the more you get better at learning when that internal experience of knowing is solid enough to recognize it, that you trust it and you trust yourself a little bit sooner, this can become a really powerful helping decision-making tool. There's also body signs. So like when you feel it in your body, again, like we talked about, that feeling in your gut. This is a really interesting one. Again, one of the authors tells the story of a counselor friend of his that knows when she's getting to the heart of the matter with a client when her right knee starts to ache. Apparently, her unconscious has decided that her right knee is the place that speaks to her. So when her right knee aches, she thinks, oh, this is important. We're getting to key information here. So she's aware of her body and she listens. I think that's actually quite amazing. We also have collective confirmation. And this is that social aspect I mentioned, the insight that occurs communally when everybody around the table suddenly realizes what the best idea is or what the best way to move forward is. And it's not necessarily because it was the idea that everybody initially voted for, but somehow everybody comes together and now recognizes it as the best answer, right? And that also brings us to simultaneity. It's a tricky word to say. When you're thinking about something or trying to make a decision and then stuff starts coming into you from everywhere, right? So like you're thinking about, should I go to Barcelona or should I go to Florence, which I think is a great thing to have to figure out. And everywhere you turn, it's Spain, right? You're walking home and you walk past a Spanish restaurant. And you get home and your significant other has made something in Spanish for dinner. And you're like, what is this, right? Your aunt, who never writes to you at all, keeps sending you text messages or emails from Barcelona. You go to a design class and there's pictures of Gaudi's architecture in Barcelona. In other words, have you ever had that experience where it's just like you're trying to figure something out and then you just start seeing it everywhere? So in the chat box, let me know, who's had that experience? And what do you think it is? Is it the universe is determined, you need to do one thing or the other? Or is it your deep internal consciousness that's really attracted to one of the other options? And it's taking every opportunity to respond to something around you and use it to signal to you what it thinks it's giving you, like your gut feeling. How many of you have had that experience? I mean, it happens to me a lot when I'm trying to figure something out. And then all of a sudden it's like, you just start seeing something and it just says, well, I guess that's what I should do. Anybody have that? Let me see in the chat box. It just happened. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Okay, good. So simultaneity is when a variety of media or experiences come into your awareness. And some of you may think it's a loving deity or the universe, depending on your worldview, but it's something that keeps bringing these things to your attention, right? I think it's awesome. And then lastly, we call it the aha moment, right? That, oh, that's it. You know it, just like a light bulb's popped on. That's a very cool experience because for me, it really feels solid, but it's difficult to orchestrate, right? It's still worth looking out for, but it's just one of those things for me anyway that just kind of happens. So how many of you already, it seems that you do, but how many of you already have some insight into how these and other ways of knowing work for you? I would suggest to pay attention to how you pay attention, because if you use one thing more than another, like your gut feeling, or you wait for the universe to tell you, you might be missing out on some other opportunities. So pay attention to how you pay attention and pay attention to how you know. Okay. How might you, or perhaps how do you already develop your personal ways of knowing so that you can bring them to bear in your discernment? So in other words, how do you know when you know? So give me some ideas in the thing. What do you depend on? Or do you use multiple? Oh, cool. You were hesitating between Spain and Morocco for a year abroad. That's awesome. Did one thing come? What did you use, Sophia, if you don't mind me asking? Just type it in the chat box. What did you use to make that decision, or did you make the decision? Did things start coming to you, or did you cognitively think about it? Or how did it happen? Just get a gut feeling? Huh? Not decided yet. Okay, so this is perfect. You're getting all this information to help you make that decision. Here are a couple possibilities, okay, that might help you. Journaling, right? Reflection or analysis, meditation, prayer, retreat, that spiritual connection. Music and the arts, okay? Yoga, exercise, gratefulness exercises. These are all ways to help you. Maybe watch some YouTube videos about Spain and or Morocco. All kinds of different things you can do, okay? So, okay, does everybody remember the Cookie Monster slide a while back when we asked you to jot down a question and the emotion that went along with it? Well, I want you to think about how you might apply multiple ways of knowing and discernment to that decision. Jot down some notes, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end of our presentation to answer any questions on that. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys though, okay? Kim?
Choosing wisdom of the emotions. So let's explore the role of emotions as we move to choosing. Reflect on a time that you've experienced a gut feeling. Did you listen to it? Or maybe you just ignored it. Dan Goleman, a psychologist and science journalist, wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence in 2006. He popularized the idea that good decision-making included using emotions and some understanding of your own gut feelings. Now, Dan suggests that your primitive brain, located in the emotional center, acts as the keeper of your wisdom database. It determines what's good and what's bad, what you should go towards, and maybe what you should run away from, through gut feelings and emotions, and not through words, as it has no connection to your language center. It's your gut experience and feelings that inform your brain about what's a good idea or a bad idea. Now, the point here is that if you start paying attention to these signals from your primitive brain and emotions, and use these as valuable data in your decision-making process. But one caution, there is a downside to this wisdom. Since it's the sum total of our life experience, it can also be the source of a bias, as it may reflect some lessons learned from our social environment. So let's hear from Ruth Chang, who is a philosopher professor at Rutgers, and how we might navigate decisions where the options we've narrowed down seem equal or on par, and thus we're stuck because we don't know which option to choose.
So when we face hard choices, we shouldn't beat our head against a wall trying to figure out which alternative is better. There is no best alternative. Instead of looking for reasons out there, we should be looking for reasons in here. Who am I to be? You might decide to be a pink sock wearing, cereal loving, country living banker. And I might decide to be a black sock wearing, urban donut loving artist. What we do in hard choices is very much up to each of us. Now, people who don't exercise their normative powers in hard choices are drifters. We all know people like that. I drifted into being a lawyer. I didn't put my agency behind lawyering. I wasn't for lawyering. Drifters allow the world to write the story of their lives. They let mechanisms of reward and punishment, pats on the head, fear, the easiness of an option, to determine what they do. So the lesson of hard choices: reflect on what you can put your agency behind, on what you can be for, and through hard choices, become that person. Far from being sources of agony and dread, hard choices are precious opportunities for us to celebrate what is special about the human condition. That the reasons that govern our choices as correct or incorrect sometimes run out. And it is here in the space of hard choices that we have the power to create reasons for ourselves to become the distinctive people that we are. And that's why hard choices are not a curse, but a godsend.
Okay. So when faced with choices on a par, you can ask yourself, who am I to become on the other side of this decision? And hopefully using these various tools and capabilities, we can have confidence in making our choice. But once we've made a decision, it is important to let go of the other options we have been considering and move on. Now, to consider why letting go and moving on is important, we're going to hear from one more psychologist, Dan Gilbert, who is a professor at Harvard. Now, one group was given the option of reversing their decision to get a different print. He's going to talk a little bit about the group that had the ability to reverse their decision.
Advantage. Here's an experiment we did at Harvard. We created a photography course, a black and white photography course, and we allowed students to come in and learn how to use a darkroom. So we gave them cameras, they went around campus, they took 12 pictures of their favorite professors in their dorm room and their dog and all the other things they wanted to have Harvard memories of. They bring us the camera, we make up a contact sheet, they figure out which are the 2 best pictures, and we now spend 6 hours teaching them about darkrooms, and they blow 2 of them up and they have 2 gorgeous 8x10 glossies of meaningful things to them, and we say, which one would you like to give up? They say, I have to give one up. Oh yes, we need one as evidence of the class project. So you have to give me one, you have to make a choice, you get to keep one, and I get to keep one. Now, there are 2 conditions in this experiment. In one case, the students are told, but if you want to change your mind, I'll always have the other one here, and in the next 4 days before I actually mail it to headquarters, I'll be glad to, headquarters. I'll be glad to swap it out with you. In fact, I'll come to your dorm room and just give me an email. Better yet, I'll check with you. You ever want to change your mind, it's totally returnable. The other half of the students are told exactly the opposite. Make your choice, and by the way, the mail is going out, in 2 minutes to England. Your picture will be winging its way over the Atlantic. You will never see it again. Now, half of the students in each of these conditions are asked to make predictions about how much they're going to come to like the picture that they keep and the picture they leave behind. Other students are just sent back to their little dorm rooms, and they are measured over the next 3 to 6 days on their liking and satisfaction with the pictures. Look at what we find. First of all, here's what students think is going to happen. They think they're going to maybe come to like the picture they chose a little more than the one they left behind, but these are not statistically significant differences. It's a very small increase, and it doesn't much matter whether they were in the reversible or irreversible condition. Wrong-o, bad simulators, because here's what's really happening, both right before the swap and 5 days later. People who are stuck with that picture, who have no choice, who can never change their mind, like it a lot. And people who are deliberating, should I return it? Have I gotten the right one? Maybe this isn't the good one. Maybe I left the good one, have killed themselves. They don't like their picture. And in fact, even after the opportunity to swap has expired, they still don't like their picture. Why? Because the irreversible condition is not conducive to the synthesis of happiness. So here's the final piece of this experiment. We bring in a whole new group of naive Harvard students, and we say, we're doing a photography course and we can do it one of two ways. We could do it so that when you take the two pictures, you'd have 4 days to change your mind, or we're doing another course where you take the two pictures and you make up your mind right away and you can never change it. Which course would you like to be in? Duh. 66% of the students, 2/3, prefer to be in the course where they have the opportunity to change their mind. Hello, 66% of the students choose to be in the course in which they will ultimately be deeply dissatisfied with the picture. Because they do not know the conditions under which synthetic happiness grows.
So as Dan beautifully stated, once you make a decision, the critical thing is not to be reevaluating it. When you truly have the options and don't have a scientist rigging the experiment to tell you that you can take it back or that you can't take it back, leaves it only to you. Only you can self-manage this. And all of us have to make choices. But once we commit to something, you have to commit long enough to really get the value out of it. That is why we should let go and move on. So keeping your options open is often recited as conventional wisdom. Now, how many of you can just type in the chat yes or no, have been trained to believe that you should get lots of options and always keep these options open? Has anybody heard that? From parents, grandparents? Then keep your options open. You never know what's going to happen. I see a couple yeses, yes. And it looks like many of us might have been taught this, but the point of an option is for it to eventually become a decision. An option never followed through and never realized and never chosen is just an idea. It's not actually anything at all. And it turns out it doesn't work. Just maintaining options and keeping your doors open so you always have a backup plan doesn't work. And this is what Dan Gilbert was just talking about. Actually, the most effective thing to be successful and happy is once you've made a decision, act like you have no other option but to be fully engaged in the choice that you made. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't change your past in the future, but it's all about full speed ahead and own the choice that you made. A better approach to dealing with option maintenance is not hanging on a long list of options, but recognizing that you can develop an option discovery methodology that will keep options coming your way in the future forever. Because you practice option generation and discovery, be confident that you can generate new options if you had to, whenever you're faced with a decision. Now, Tomoko's going to walk you through the process of letting go and moving on.
Hey, so here's a process for how you might implement letting go and moving on. That comes to us from Dr. Afia Ofora-Mensah at Princeton University. So this process, known as cycle of non-regret, comes from a talk she delivered at Overin. Okay, so let's go through this. Number 1, make the best decision you can with the information you have at the time. Number 2, resist the temptation to judge past you with the information that present you received after the decision was made. Number 3, recognize that you are who you are. You can only be you because everything in your life has happened in precisely the way and exactly the order in which it has happened. And number 4, love yourself. Lastly, number 5, trust that future you can handle the results of whatever decision present you makes. Okay, so as we close this discussion of decision making, I want to offer one final thought. Let's imagine that I'm thinking of going to the beach this weekend. I look at the weather forecast and there's a 15% of chance of rain. So I decide to go, but when I get there, it ends up pouring rain. Did I make a bad decision? Many of us intuitively think that the quality of a decision is equal to the quality of the outcome, but often there are factors that we cannot control. What I want to suggest is that these two things are not synonymous. If I've considered all of the data, followed a process like the one we just shared, and made it as well-informed a decision as possible, then I would argue that it was a good decision regardless of how the outcome looks. So with this in mind, we can recognize that it's most valuable to consider what's important to us, what we can control, and where these overlap. And how does this process compare to how have you approached decision making in your life? What from today might you use personally? And wanting what you get versus getting what you want, how does this sit with you? The decision matrix tool can be used for our own life. And of course, we can use that while at school or even after.
So maybe what's something from today that you're still chewing on, either because it's new or because it feels different? And then how do you make these decisions? So in a sentence, you could choose ones from something I took from this session was, and just kind of jot it down. Or it could be something that resonated with you, and you can jot down that as well. And for me, something that resonated was not making a decision is actually making a decision.